In today's video I'm going to show you how you can paint really cool looking Second Dynasty Necrons in only a couple of simple steps.
Hey guys, I'm Zoltan and you're watching Phalanx Miniatures.
A couple of videos ago I painted a non-metallic metal score pack load which turned out pretty nicely, and if you want to watch how I did that you can click the link in the corner. But today I want to show you how you can pull off a similar color scheme but much easier with true metallics.
I show you how I painted the metal armor and the skeleton, the cool green glowing swords, the glowing red eyes and the dark sand base. So let's do it. I used AK Interactive bronze for all the armor on the models, but you can also replicate this with any bronze color from your favorite paint brand as well. For example, Cycorex bronze from Citadel would be great. The trick is to not cover the whole surface fully with the paint. I intentionally want to leave the shadows black, and I also leave most of the damage, the little dents and sculpted scratches on the models, black as well. I do it this way because, like this, I don't have to rely on just the washes that I will use later to create the shadows, and the end result will have much more contrast in the end. And I use the bronze from my wet palette, and yes, you can put metallic colors on the wet palette, it is not a crime and it works. This allows me to use it in the form of a heavy overbrush, meaning that I apply it similarly to a dry brush, but I remove less paint and I am much less rough with it compared to a dry brush. I apply a little pressure and just gently caress the surface with the bristles. I don't want to achieve full coverage except on the most upward facing areas where I can do it by applying multiple passes. Basically, anything facing down barely gets any paint, anything facing to the side gets at least one full pass, and everything facing up gets multiple passes until it is fully covered. For all the parts I wanted to be steel, that is mostly the parts of the skeleton that are visible, the big shoulder guards and the heads, I used gunmetal from AK Interactive, but something like iron and steel from Citadel would be perfect as well. The method I used is the same as before with the bronze, not full coverage, just a heavy overbrush. Once I was done with the metallic base coats, it was time to knock back the color a bit and add more contrast by applying some washes all over the metal. First, I used Reclaimed Flash Shade on everything I painted bronze before. I simply took a big brush and applied it quite liberally all over, only soaking up some of it where it was pooling a lot. Then I did the same with Noon Oil on all the gunmetal parts.
Ideally, you let this sit for a while until it dries before you start working on the metals again, so while it was doing so, this was the perfect time for me to start working on the swords and all the glowing bits. Doing the swords can be super fast or very time consuming, depending on how you do it, but I really wanted to make it easy for myself, so first I created a rough sketch about where the transitions should be, and then came in and smoothed everything out. First, I needed to create some opposing transitions on the swords. Essentially, Necron swords can be neatly divided in the middle into two halves lengthwise. I simply decided that one half will be dark in the middle and light on the ends, and the other half should be the exact opposite. This creates a really nice contrast on the blade. Once I knew where the sword should be darker and where it should be lighter, I started painting in progressively lighter and lighter greens. But since this was supposed to be a sketch, I didn't do any glazing. I simply made sure that I leave some of the previous color behind and I make everything uneven so that later it will be easier to create a transition. If you create a straight line where the new color starts, it will be hard to smooth it out, but a scratchy, uneven transition can be blended easily. I also made sure that I achieved full coverage with every new paint. It is not enough if you just glaze in the new color. Ideally, you need to get to a full base coat coverage towards the end of the color transition. The trick to the glow effect is that halfway through I switch to colors that contain not only green but also yellow, and the final color is almost completely yellow, only with some green in it. The dark green transitioning into a yellow will look like the sword is glowing. You might notice that I also did a lot of edge highlights with all the colors everywhere, and this is not strictly necessary, I just do them out of habit I guess, and I'll do an edge highlight step after the smoothing phase anyway, but it will make the end result look slightly better in the end. Once I was satisfied with the sketch, I switched to an airbrush to smooth everything out. And of course you can do this by hand as well by using glazes, but it's just much less fun and way slower, so I decided for the airbrush. Since I had the sketch in place, I didn't have to do anything fancy, just apply a glaze with the same colors I used with the brush, but now through the airbrush.
I used high dilution, something like 70% thinner and 30% paint, with low pressure and aimed short bursts on the transitions between the colors. For example, I smoothed the transition between the black and the dark green with diluted dark green, and then switched to light green to smooth the transition between the dark green and the light green. If you lighten the whole sword a bit too much with this and you lose saturation, you can mix in some black with the dark green and strengthen the darker parts again like I did. Once I was satisfied with the end result, I took some watered down black paint and blacklined the grooves on the swords. You can mix some flow improver with the black if you're having difficulties with this and simply let it flow into where it should go. Finally, I use my highest highlight color, Pistachio, to highlight all the edges. If you struggle with this one, I recently made a video about how to do it easily on the channel. I'll put the link in the corner if you want to check it out.
I wanted these guys to have the glowing eyes of the original Terminator, and the method I used for it was super simple.
I took some pure white and painted the bottom edge of the eye socket and the little pupil that is fortunately sculpted onto the model. Then I took some fluorescent red and just flooded the whole socket with it. I used 3-4 layers until I was satisfied because this paint is quite translucent. Once it was dry, I simply dotted in the eye with pure white again, and the white in the middle of the fluorescent red makes it look like the pupil is glowing. It looks properly scary, I think.
At this point the washes were probably dry enough, but I still decided to do the bases first before I did any highlighting.
The texture on the bases I did before with Asphalt from AK Interactive. This provided me with a nice gritty texture on the base, the perfect condition for some dry brushing. First I did a quite heavy dry brush of mud brown. Then with less and less pressure and on a progressively smaller surface with gold brown. Then a mix of gold brown and ice yellow. And finally just a tiny bit with pure ice yellow. It is as easy as it gets, but looks great and complements the colors, I think, quite nicely.
Finally it was time to highlight the metals.
Since the wash darkened down the original color considerably, I simply used the original bronze color as the first highlight. I picked out most of the edges and also overbrushed it again on the parts facing up where originally I achieved full coverage with the bronze. These were still brighter than the sides and the bottom, and I tried to emphasize this instead of fully covering it. For this I used the paint quite thinly, almost glazing it in but without any water added. Instead I simply made sure to remove most of the paint from the brush on a paper towel. This way I could keep my layers relatively thin and transparent. For the parts that were originally gunmetal, I used gunmetal again since the wash darkened it down just like the bronze. For the second highlight I mixed in some aluminum with the bronze to make it brighter and did the same as before but on an even smaller surface. For the second highlight I used steel from Vallejo, and this I also used to thinly edge highlight some of the bronze in a few places where I wanted it to be the brightest. Finally, once I was finished with the highlights, I added a couple of tufts, painted the base rims black, and the end result looks like this.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.